Young-Soo had built an empire on control, believing fear was currency. He never expected his undoing to begin with a spilled glass of cheap wine and the quiet, unyielding glare of a woman who refused to even whisper his name. The world of Young-Soo was geometric. Sharp angles, flawless surfaces, and absolute silence when he spoke. Tonight, the silence was only broken by the soft clinking of ice in glasses and the carefully modulated voices of his subordinates at the head table of the Onyx, his premier soul club. At 29, he ran his late father's organization with a terrifying blend of old-world discipline and modern, ruthless efficiency. Young-Soo wore his power like a tailored suit, perfect, expensive, and intimidating. His gaze swept the opulent private lounge, missing nothing, dismissing everything. He sought order, not amusement. He was discussing the logistics of a new, high-value shipment when his attention snagged on a discordant note. A flash of vibrant, defiant color near the back entrance. Rose lived in a world of texture and noise. She was 27, a freelance dance choreographer and costumer who paid her rent by working late events, transforming raw, chaotic energy into art. She was in the service corridor of the Onyx, wrestling a bulky, custom-made garment bag, a heavy velvet coat embroidered with gold thread, toward the VIP dressing room. Her small budget meant taking the service entrance, a concrete maze of bins and harsh fluorescent lights. She was already late, stressed, and running on 3 hours of sleep. Her emotional state was a frayed wire, one spark away from snapping. As she rounded a corner, struggling to keep the heavy bag off the grimy floor, she stumbled backward, colliding with a stack of empty glassware left carelessly near the wall. The sound of smashing crystal was sickeningly loud, tearing a hole through the club's ambient drone. Young-Soo's meeting stopped instantly. Every man froze. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop. He turned, his dark eyes narrowing to slits as he registered the disruption. The source of the noise was a woman, tall, dark-skinned, dressed in practical black clothing, now standing amid glittering shards of glass and a stain of cheap, red house wine splashed across the pristine white marble floor. Her chest was heaving slightly, but her face, when she finally looked up and met his stare from across the room, held not panic, but a deep, controlled frustration. "Can you believe the carelessness?" she muttered, though not to him. She was addressing the universe. This audacity, this utter lack of immediate terror, was what annoyed Young-Soo most. She wasn't begging, apologizing, or crying, she was annoyed. He stood slowly, his perfect stillness drawing the attention of the entire club. He needed this problem eliminated, silently and swiftly. But something in her powerful, unyielding posture, even as she was covered in wine and glass dust, stopped him from simply issuing an order. This small, unforeseen disruption felt far larger than a broken mess. It felt like a challenge. What do you think Rose's defiant attitude hides? Is she truly fearless, or is she fighting something deeper inside? Let me know in the comments below. Young-Soo walked toward her, his steps slow and deliberate, amplifying the silence. The floor manager, a man who usually moved with frantic energy, remained frozen, eyes wide with terror, unsure whether to clean the mess or flee. Young-Soo stopped a foot away from Rose. He didn't shout. He didn't even raise his voice. His tone was a chilled blade. "You have caused a disturbance, damaged property, and ruined a meeting I considered essential. I don't tolerate carelessness in my establishment." Rose finally looked up fully. She saw the expense in his clothing, the absolute certainty of violence in the stance of the 6 men now flanking him, and the cruel, beautiful isolation in his eyes. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but the lifetime of refusing to shrink before men who demanded submission held her steady. She didn't flinch, didn't back down an inch. "Your employee left stacked glasses where they shouldn't be," she said, her voice low and tight. "And if this mess is so essential, you should have invested in better staff to keep the service route clear." The air crackled. Young-Soo's men shifted, ready to move. This was the moment. She was supposed to crumple, apologize, and accept whatever punitive action he deemed necessary. But Rose felt the familiar heat of rage rising, the fury at being judged by a person who didn't know her struggle. Young-Soo reached out, intending to grip her arm, to physically enforce the submission his words demanded. It was a gesture of absolute dismissive control. But Rose moved faster. She looked him dead in the eye, and instead of pulling away, she did the last thing anyone expected. She dropped the heavy velvet garment bag. It landed with a soft, expensive thud. Then she reached out, dipped 2 fingers into the spilled red wine on the marble floor, and quickly, defiantly, drew a thick, crude crimson streak across the pristine white cuff of Young-Soo's custom-tailored jacket. The shock was absolute. Gasps echoed through the lounge. Young-Soo's own face went utterly blank, a rare break in his composed mask. He was accustomed to fear, to begging, to threats, never to this casual, intimate violation. It wasn't a powerful action, but an audacious one. It was a mark, a stain, a personal annoyance elevated to a declaration of war. Rose pulled her hand back, her breathing shallow, the wine dripping from her fingers. "Now we both have a mess," she whispered, her eyes burning into his. "Now we're even." The men around them didn't know whether to shoot her or restrain her. Young-Soo simply stared at the wine stain on his cuff, then back at Rose. His initial annoyance had curdled into something far more volatile, a sudden intense curiosity mixed with a furious, dangerous attraction. He could have her killed. Yet he couldn't look away from the fierce, desperate courage in her gaze. Young-Soo didn't move for a long minute. The wine stain on his cuff felt scorching hot, a tangible break in his armor. He eventually let out a low, almost silent breath, signaling the chaos was contained. His second-in-command, Jae-wook, stepped forward, ready to grab Rose, but Young-Soo stopped him with a single, sharp gesture. "Clean the floor," Young-Soo commanded the manager, his voice low but carrying the finality of thunder. He then turned his intense gaze back to Rose. "Get out, now, before I forget your breathing." Rose needed no second warning. She snatched up her heavy coat bag, her muscles screaming with the effort. As she retreated, she didn't run, but walked with stiff, defiant dignity, not daring to look back until the heavy club doors shut behind her. Once outside in the cold night air, the adrenaline crashed, leaving her trembling violently. She leaned against a stone pillar, sinking down until the rough concrete scraped her cheek. What did I just do? She had marked the most dangerous man in Seoul. Her fight had always been against internal demons and disrespect. She hadn't meant to pick a literal fight with a mafia boss. She swore she could feel the phantom weight of his hand reaching for her. She had to leave the city. Back inside, Young-Soo watched the floor staff frantically swab away the wine and glass. He dismissed the meeting, the logistics suddenly feeling inconsequential. He isolated himself in his private office, peeling off the ruined jacket. He didn't toss it away, he draped it over a chair, the crimson smear stark against the white fabric. He was the only person in his world who commanded such absolute respect that a minor act of defiance should have been instantly punishable by destruction. Yet, he hadn't moved. Why? He hated her for the feeling of inadequacy she had triggered. The realization that his perfect control was brittle enough to be shattered by a moment of reckless, passionate anger. He told himself he was intrigued by her lack of fear, an interesting anomaly he would study, then crush. But the memory of her dark eyes, wide and challenging, refused to fade. He reached for his phone, prepared to issue a simple order. Find her. Bring her. But paused. If he forced her back, he would reclaim his control, but he would lose the defiant energy that had intrigued him. He needed her to be unbent. The external pressure came quickly. Jae-wook knocked and entered, his jaw tight. "Sir, the police report the wine stain was from a bottle of expensive vintage, not house wine. The owner of the coat she dropped is demanding an apology. He's a prominent politician. This woman is drawing attention. We need to silence her." Young-Soo looked at the jacket on the chair, then back at his loyal subordinate. "No," he said, the decision surprising even himself. "I will handle her. Tell the politician to be patient. I want her left alone, for now." He wasn't protecting her yet. He was keeping his curiosity pure, ensuring his new, dangerous object of interest wasn't dulled by the actions of his men. Rose spent 2 frantic days trying to secure a ticket out of Seoul, her fear a constant, metallic taste on her tongue. Her savings were meager, and she knew Young-Soo's reach was limitless. She decided her best chance was to get out quietly before he fully mobilized his network. On the 3rd night, she packed a small bag and headed toward the train station, using back alleys and keeping her head down. Meanwhile, Young-Soo's control had fractured in an unforeseen way. A rival syndicate, attempting to exploit the chaos from the previous week's police action, had targeted a minor transit point he relied on, a dimly lit industrial warehouse district near the old port. Young-Soo, refusing to delegate a crisis that impacted his reputation, drove out personally with Jae-wook, planning to swiftly intimidate the rivals back into their territory. Rose, desperate to avoid the main roads, cut through that exact industrial district just as the rival group's ambush escalated. Shots rang out. She gasped, freezing behind a stack of rotting crates, the sounds of shouting and breaking glass terrifyingly close. Young-Soo was pinned down behind his armored car. His communication line was cut, and he realized too late that this was a well-coordinated attack. He glanced toward a narrow gap between two containers, looking for a flanking route. That's when he saw her. Rose, her dark face stark with terror, curled defensively near a derelict loading ramp. "Get down!" he barked, pulling her toward him without thinking. Rose resisted instantly, trying to claw her way free, believing he was the source of the danger. He slammed his hand over her mouth, pulling her flat against the dirty asphalt just as a spray of automatic fire ripped through the metal above them. The smell of dust and cordite filled her lungs. "Stop fighting me!" Young-Soo hissed into her ear, his breath hot. "Unless you want to be collateral damage, you follow my lead." Jae-wook, who had retreated, motioned frantically toward an old, unmarked, subterranean maintenance entrance. Young-Soo pushed Rose ahead of him, half-dragging her down the dark, narrow steps. The tunnel was cold and damp. Smelling of ozone and sewage, they plunged into the darkness, Rose's labored breathing echoing Young-Soo's tense, shallow gasps. They emerged into a small, steel-reinforced room, a forgotten, cramped safe house, hidden beneath the docks. Young-Soo quickly secured the reinforced door. They were trapped in a space barely larger than a storage closet. The only illumination came from a single, dusty, bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. They stood inches apart, heartbeats pounding in the strained silence. Rose's eyes, widened, accusatory, found the wine stain still visible on his jacket, which he hadn't had time to discard. Their dangerous proximity had been violently renewed, but this time, survival, not pride, was the only thing binding them. The silence in the cramped bunker stretched thin, heavy with the weight of unspent violence and forced intimacy. Young-Soo checked the single ventilation shaft, ensuring their presence wasn't betrayed by light or sound. He was hyper-focused on logistics, refusing to acknowledge the woman trembling 5 feet away. Rose, however, was focused entirely on him, the man who was both her captor and her immediate protector. "Why are you hiding me?" Rose finally whispered, her voice rough. "You could have left me. You were ready to kill me 3 days ago." Young-Soo shrugged off his ruined jacket, revealing a crisp, blood-stained shirt. "You were in my path," he stated flatly, minimizing the truth. "Collateral damage is bad for my reputation. Now sit down and stay quiet." Rose didn't move. She noticed his trembling hands as he pressed gauze onto a graze on his forearm. She saw the exhaustion beneath the cold facade. She realized his control was a choice, a relentless effort. "You like ordering people around," Rose said, stepping closer, ignoring the danger. "I saw it at the club. That's why I did what I did." He looked up sharply, fury sparking in his eyes. "You drew on me to prove a point about my pride. I could have had you erased." "I know," Rose interrupted, her voice dropping, laced with old pain. "But my father was a man who ruled our house the same way, with absolute control and pride. If you didn't obey, you were worthless. I spent 20 years of my life apologizing for being present. I won't do it again, not for him, and definitely not for a stranger in an expensive suit." She rubbed her arms, her defiant posture cracking to reveal the raw trauma underneath. Her resistance wasn't a choice of the moment. It was a scar from the past. Young-Soo leaned back against the concrete wall, suddenly seeing her not as an annoyance, but as a mirror reflecting his own gilded cage. His father hadn't demanded obedience. He had demanded perfection, confusing love with absolute dominion. "My father," Young-Soo began, his voice surprisingly raw, "once publicly humiliated my mother because she chose a painting for the office that he deemed too feminine. He made her burn it. He told me that sentiment was weakness. I thought control was the only way to be strong." He looked at Rose, seeing the wine stain on his jacket, the painting's ashes, and his mother's tear-streaked face all at once. His power had been purchased with a soul-crushing loss of humanity. He motioned toward the small, dusty canteen. "There's an emergency first aid kit in there. Fix my arm." He tossed the kit toward her. It wasn't an order. It was an offering, a profound, fragile moment of trust given to the woman who had defied him utterly. We often mistake control for strength, just like Young-Soo. Have you ever felt trapped by someone else's rules or your own need for perfection? Share your thoughts below. Rose opened the first aid kit. Her hands, usually adept at manipulating fabric and motion, moved with practiced care. She sterilized the wound on Young-Soo's forearm, the antiseptic stinging the graze. She didn't look at his eyes, but she felt his unwavering focus on her, a gaze far more intense than when he'd been assessing a threat. "You're good at this," he murmured, his voice softer than she'd heard it before. "I had an uncle who was clumsy," Rose lied gently, protecting her true history. "I learned fast." She began wrapping the bandage, her fingers brushing the warm, hard skin of his arm. The contact was startling, generating a raw, unintended current between them. It was the first human touch he had received in months that wasn't transactional or hostile. "The coat?" Young-Soo asked, diverting the sudden intimacy. "The one you dropped. Why was it so important?" "It was for a dancer," Rose explained, allowing the subject change. "She performs a piece about resilience, about covering up pain with beauty. The velvet was heavy, a burden, but the gold embroidery was the strength she found underneath. If I didn't deliver it tonight, she loses the gig." "You care about the burden and the beauty," Young-Soo observed. Rose nodded, securing the wrap. "You only care about cutting the burden and discarding the beauty if it slows you down." "Perhaps I learned to see the value in both," he countered, looking at the rough, tired lines around her eyes, finding them more compelling than the flawless faces that usually populated his world. He reached out and gently brushed a stray shard of glass from her hair, a profoundly intimate, non-threatening gesture. "In this room, away from the noise, you don't look like a threat, you just look exhausted." Rose swallowed, suddenly breathless. The raw, dangerous tension from Act 2 had refined itself into a fragile shield of mutual vulnerability. "And you, without the geometry of your office, you just look lonely." Young-Soo didn't deny it. He reached up, his hand catching her face, his thumb gently wiping the dried wine and dust smudge from her cheekbone. His touch was hesitant, almost questioning. He had spent his life controlling. Now he was asking permission. "Why me?" he whispered, his eyes dark with confusion and longing. "Why did you draw that line on my jacket? Why didn't you apologize?" "Because you annoy me," Rose admitted, the truth cutting through the fear. "And because I hated what you represented, the pride that crushes everything soft. But mostly, because I knew somehow you were the only one who might actually see it." He didn't answer with words. He closed the distance, his kiss fierce, immediate, and utterly consuming. It was not a kiss of romance, but of raw, desperate recognition. Two isolated souls colliding in the dark. The intensity of the kiss was instantly broken by the muffled scraping sound of the maintenance hatch above them. Young-Soo pulled back, his face instantly reverting to the cold, absolute focus of the crime boss. "Jae-wook is here," he muttered, grabbing his discarded jacket. "Stay low, don't make a sound." Rose watched the transformation. The warmth vanished, replaced by the geometric coldness of control. He was back in his suit of armor. Young-Soo slipped through a hidden panel in the back of the room, leaving Rose alone in the dim light. She heard the faint thud of the hatch opening, followed by Young-Soo's sharp, efficient voice confirming the area was secure. She realized with a jolt that he hadn't just secured the building. He had secured her. He had never asked her what she wanted to do. He had simply ordered her to remain quiet and still. Young-Soo reappeared moments later, Jae-wook behind him, looking relieved but cautious. "The rivals pulled back. They think we fled the district," Jae-wook reported, then spotted Rose. His relief immediately soured into confusion. "Sir, why is she here?" "She was a casualty of the ambush. She stays until the heat is fully off the area," Young-Soo stated, his tone brooking no argument. He turned to Rose, and his voice, though still low, was strictly managerial. "I've arranged transport. You'll be taken to a secure location outside the city. It's safe. You leave now." Rose felt the betrayal like a physical blow. He wasn't giving her an option. He was giving her a command, a well-packaged dismissal. He was removing the disruption to protect his order, exactly as her father used to remove anything that questioned his authority. She stood up slowly, facing him. You're doing it again, she said, the words heavy with disappointment. I am securing your safety, Rose. It is necessary, Young-Soo retorted, frustration creeping into his tone. No, you are asserting control, Rose cried, her voice trembling. I told you I hate being ordered. You don't get to choose where I go. You kissed me, and 10 minutes later, you're commanding me like I'm a subordinate, an object to be relocated. You're exactly like every other man I've spent my life fighting. Your control is the only thing that matters to you. The accusation hit Young-Soo harder than any bullet. He felt the sting of her raw honesty, but his pride, wounded by Jae-wook's presence and the recent threat, forced his denial. You don't understand the dangers. This is not a discussion. I am doing what is best for you, and you will accept it. Rose grabbed her coat bag, tears of anger and hurt finally streaking her dusty face. You don't get to decide what's best for me. If you think safety is worth losing the right to choose, then you haven't learned a single thing about what freedom costs. You can keep your safe house and your control. She didn't look at Jae-wook. Her gaze was locked on Young-Soo, cold and unforgiving. I should have let you arrest me. At the club! She turned and ran for the hatch, leaving the two men standing in the broken silence. Rose fled the subterranean bunker, not caring where she went, only that she was moving away from Young-Soo's suffocating control. She stumbled onto the main road near the port, her heart aching with the sharp realization that the moment of connection had been fleeting, a lie built on desperate proximity. She had been right about him all along. He was a man who confused power with affection. She found a cheap, transient hotel miles away, collapsing onto the thin mattress. She was safe, but the victory felt hollow. She was back where she started, alone, running, and fiercely independent, but now carrying the heavy knowledge that she had finally risked her heart, only to have it betrayed by the one thing she hated most, an arbitrary command. Her fingers automatically traced the place on her cheek where Young-Soo had wiped the dust. Was she strong enough to choose isolation again? Meanwhile, Young-Soo remained in the bunker, the space feeling vast and empty without Rose's defiant presence. He dismissed Jae-wook curtly, then stood alone, staring at the hidden panel Rose had just exited. His mind, usually a fortress of cold logic, was in chaos. He was safe, his operation was secure, but he felt a catastrophic, debilitating loss. Sir, she's gone, Jae-wook's voice crackled over the secure line. She was seen heading toward the central district. Shall I have her located? Young-Soo gripped the phone until his knuckles went white. Locate her. Arrest her. Force her to be safe. That was the logical, proud choice. It was the choice his father would have made. It is necessary. But then he remembered Rose's trembling chin as she declared, You don't get to choose where I go. He remembered the raw fear beneath her defiance, the product of a lifetime spent under a tyrant's thumb. His control, meant to protect her, had simply reinforced her deepest trauma. He realized, with a sickening clarity, that if he sent his men, he would destroy her spirit entirely, making him no better than her father. He would be safe, but utterly alone. He had to choose between his empire and his soul. Young-Soo took a deep, shuddering breath. No, Jae-wook, he said, his voice quiet, stripped of all command. Do not search for her. You will do nothing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, intricately carved onyx pin, a token of his father's pride and the symbol of his family's absolute power, a piece he wore every day. He placed it on the floor, then retrieved his phone. He didn't call her. He knew she wouldn't answer. Instead, he sent a single, painful text message to the burner phone she carried. I hate being alone more than I hate losing control. You were right. I am sorry. I won't command you again. But I am waiting for you at the Onyx, by the service corridor. I will wait until dawn. It was a total surrender, a painful choice of vulnerability over pride. The stage was set for the final act. Rose now held the power to decide if he was worthy of the trust she had lost. Rose stared at the text message on the flickering screen of the hotel phone. I hate being alone more than I hate losing control. It was the most honest, vulnerable statement she could have ever received from Young-Soo. He hadn't sent men. He had sent a confession of weakness, staking his entire arrogant existence on her decision. She looked at the clock. It was 4 in the morning. She had 2 hours until dawn. She left the hotel and took a slow, agonizing taxi ride back across the city, the silence in the cab amplifying her internal debate. She wasn't just driving toward a man. She was driving toward a choice between safe, lonely independence and dangerous, uncertain partnership. When she arrived at the Onyx, the streetlights were beginning to fade into the weak, pre-dawn gray. She approached the service corridor, the place where the conflict had begun. Young-Soo was there, leaning against the cold stone pillar she had slumped against days earlier. He was no longer wearing his blood-stained shirt. He was in a simple, dark sweater, his hair slightly rumpled. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, stripped of his usual perfect geometry. He stood up straight when he saw her. He didn't rush forward, didn't attempt to touch her. He simply stood, allowing her to approach. Rose stopped a few feet away, her voice raw. "You actually waited." "I told you I would." He met her gaze, and she saw no pride, only deep exhaustion and sincerity. "I came back here because this is where I confused annoyance with attraction. This is where I let my need for control ruin what we found." Rose looked down, then noticed the single, small, black item placed neatly on the ground between them. It was the onyx pin, the symbol of his family's dynasty and absolute authority. It looked utterly out of place on the dirty concrete. "I can't promise you safety," Young-Soo said, his voice quiet. "That life will always carry threats, but I promise you this. I will never choose control over your freedom again. And I will never choose my pride over your presence. Take the pin. If you leave, sell it. Start a new life. If you stay, keep it. It's a reminder that I choose you, uncontrolled, defiant, and wholly responsible for yourself." Rose didn't reach for the pin. Instead, she took the final, difficult step toward him, closing the distance he had always maintained. "I don't want your safety or your pin," she whispered, her hands rising to touch his unshaven jaw. "I want you to learn what true strength is." Young-Soo closed his eyes in relief, a shudder running through him. "Teach me." She kissed him then, a soft, profound promise of partnership. They eventually left that life, much like the previous story's protagonists, trading the sharp angles of the city for a life of honest work. Rose started her own dance studio, a place where vulnerability was celebrated as strength, and Young-Soo, having liquidated his less ethical assets, quietly managed her business, finding profound peace in supporting her work. 3 years later, they stood together, not in the Onyx's private lounge, but in Rose's bright, vibrant studio. She wore a simple white dress, and Young-Soo watched her with unadulterated devotion. They were married that afternoon, two souls who found that the deepest love was born not from obedience, but from the refusal to bow. He still wore tailored suits sometimes, but they were no longer armor. They were just clothes. Rose smiled, her eyes searching his. "Remember the wine?" Young-Soo reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean silver cufflink. Engraved on the back was a tiny stylized drop of wine. "I kept the stain, to remind myself what it looks like when I'm wrong." He gently pressed the cufflink into her palm. "That day, Rose, you taught a very proud man that true power lies not in making others fear you, but in having the courage to be vulnerable for the one person you can't live without." Rose and Young-Soo found their strongest connection at their lowest point of vulnerability. What shocking moment changed your life's path for the better? Tell us your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button if you believe true love can conquer anything.